Welcome to The Growth Factor, a broadcast ministry of St. Mark Baptist Church. Today, as part of our family, you will experience the life-changing and spirit-nurturing Word of God. Please enjoy this time with us, where we're committed to helping you grow in knowledge, grow in faith, and grow in God. St. Mark Baptist Church, you grow here.
Well, welcome back to the Growth Factor podcast, a broadcast ministry of the St. Mark Baptist Church here in Little Rock, Arkansas. My name is Pastor John. I'm the Connections Pastor here at St. Mark, and I'm joined, as always, by our Senior Pastor, Dr. Philip L. Pointer, Sr. And we've been working through a series that we've called Deep Waters, Deliverance and Duty, as we're looking and exploring the book of Exodus and talking about the Israelites being delivered out of Egypt, but also talking about their attendant duty as they have been delivered to obey Christ and obey the Lord as they are walking out their faith. So we want to make sure that we utilize that theme so that we can speak into your lives and help you live out these spiritual lives in our social atmosphere. So this particular episode, we're going to be talking about masking up as we look at the Passover. This is going to be relevant. This is going to be helpful for you all. And we're looking forward to diving in as we go into deep waters. Pastor P, we're recording this in probably in the midst of one of the greatest health crises in modern history and probably our lifetime as well, as we deal with COVID-19. And I know last time we talked about the 10 commandments and that 10th commandment kind of culminating in the death of the firstborn.
Plagues, yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit, though, about a verse that we read, but we kind of glossed over as we move into this next section on being masked up and dealing with the Passover.
Yeah.
Prior to the Israelites leaving Egypt, there's something that happens in Exodus 11 that really is an interesting both historical and cultural note for us. Before we turn there, though, I want to just say that the COVID pandemic has had plague characteristics.
Very much so.
That there are things that we have endured in the midst of COVID-19 that makes it feel like a plague. And in the midst of that, we kind of saw social justice issues boil up around the country as people are sheltering in place and trying to figure out how to navigate this new normal.
Yeah.
But one of the things we did find out over the course of our time is that nobody ever lets God's people go. No. Pharaoh is repeatedly asked to let my people go, but ultimately what we're going to see is that God is the one who's going to bring them out himself.
Yeah, I want to say a couple of things about, you talk about those plague characteristics, which I think is a great way of describing the experience in COVID-19, and nothing seen in most people's lifetime. Perhaps the Spanish flu of 1918 was the last time there was a worldwide issue like this. But I want us to be clear that we talked in our last session, Pastor John, about two types of the plagues of Egypt, of the 10, that the first and the 10th were supernatural plagues that really point to Jesus Christ and the judgment he takes on our behalf. But 2 through 9 are natural. And that's what COVID-19, it feels like that natural plague, just the reality of living in a fallen world where sickness is present and where there is sickness and selfishness. Then you have what could have been endemic become a pandemic, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems like a natural consequence, and then the one plague leads to the other plague. We talked about that succession of plagues, so that the social justice issues, which have always been a part of humankind's expression, one trying to dominate over another, feeling that you're better than another. And in the U.S., so much of our history deals with that. We saw, again, as you talked about the murders of persons like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, which you worked with very closely, yourself as being a part of that hometown. This plague-like experience, we got to remember that God is at work in it. And as you said, specifically, God is bringing God's people out, sometimes because of it, sometimes through it, sometimes in spite of it. But there is a delivering work happening despite the world's worst. And that is something we cannot ever forget, or we should not minimize. We shouldn't maximize the crisis and minimize our Christ. But we have to lift God's power and sovereignty high when we talk about these matters.
Pastor Pointer, what I'm about to say is actually in the Bible.
Yeah.
The Israelites in this text in chapter 11, before we turn to the Passover, in verse 2, they're told to ask for silver and gold from their oppressors. I've done this before on an episode, but I'm about to cuss. They were called to ask for reparations.
Reparations.
Yes. The reparations that many folks in our country don't think people deserve.
Yeah.
The Israelites, when they are freed from their oppressors, are told to ask for reparations.
Yeah.
And there's kind of this cultural moment, especially in the United States and Western culture, where we've seen this happen. Well, it was supposed to happen.
Yes.
In the U.S. at the release of enslaved people. As a matter of fact, there was a field order that was generated by General Sherman, who along the coastline where I'm from in Georgia, South Carolina area, he was allotting certain allotments of land to formerly enslaved people. And this is where we get this idea or concept of 40 acres and a mule. It came from that field order from General Sherman, and black folks started to take the property that this field order said that they would. Well, what happened was the Compromise of 1872, the Hayes-Gilden Compromise, happened when Rutherford B. Hayes was elected president, and they said, well, if you withdraw federal troops from the South, we'll let you be president. As a matter, in other words, let us have our way in the South.
Yeah.
And what they did was they went back and took back that property that was to serve as reparations for African Americans in that rich area right there in coastal Georgia and South Carolina.
Yeah. And reparations, it's not something that the U.S. has never done.
Right.
Indigenous peoples in this land received reparations land and such for their mistreatment and for the land that was taken from them. We just saw a case in Oklahoma where their sovereign rights as a nation were reaffirmed and reestablished. Japanese Americans who were put in internment camps during World War II received reparations for their time in that camp, and relatively speaking, and very tragic and very unjust, but a relatively short time in comparison to the time of the Africans who were enslaved in these Americas. It's only an issue for the descendants of formerly enslaved people. And what is extreme is I heard a sermon, or heard of a sermon. I would not listen to it because I wanted to keep my religion, of a man saying at a major conference on a major stage, he preached a sermon saying why reparations are not biblical when they are all over
all the way biblical.
The Bible, Old and New Testaments, here in Exodus 11, then a part of the law of Moses there are laws of reparation. Jesus tells people, hey, go sell all you have and give it to the poor. And one respondent says, hey, listen, if I've defrauded anybody, I'll pay them back sevenfold. That's a law of reparation. So the concept, now, I don't want to argue about the administration and how it works out and all that stuff. There are people who do that stuff, but the concept, the idea, is completely biblical and has precedent historically in the U.S. And so, as such, it should not be as much of a controversial issue as it is. It is simply the result of, again, people who have power and wealth wanting to hold on to that power and wealth, and then using people who don't have a full grasp of Scripture and history to buoy them up in that way. And so, it's a completely biblical concept, and we're going to see it right here in Genesis 11 too.
Yeah, that's right. And I love what Duke Kwan says in his book Reparations that he wrote with Greg Thompson. He says that reparations are not primarily given in light of a hope for a future. They're given in light of an actual past.
Yeah, it happened.
That we actually recognize that this happened, and there needs to be some reparative work that happens as a result of that. And I like the way he puts it, because most people think economic, like we're going to get money back, right? Well, there are 3 ways that we probably need to repair things in this nation. First, he says we need to repair truth. We need to make sure that we recapture the history that has been lost and stolen from us, that we need to recapture this real idea of truth, and people have their own stories and narratives that are shaped by women in the early 20th century, white women specifically, who were daughters of the Confederacy, who wrote curriculum for young students who kind of just had this revisionist history around what happened around the Civil War. We're seeing that even today with legislation around CRT, critical race theory, things that they feel like are going to be woke laws or anti-woke laws that are being passed in several states. We have to be able to repair truth. He says repair power. We have to make sure we check our power dynamics, right? And make sure that we're sharing power and or giving away power, as we talked previously before with Jesus. And he's saying that, hey, the greatest among you should be the least, and you need to serve one another. And then ultimately, we need to repair wealth.
Yeah.
African Americans have not been part of the wealth building experience in America. So there needs to be a way to build capacity for that, so that we can't say to someone who started late from the starting line, when you're almost at the finish, say, all right, now you got to catch up, rather than saying that. We need to be able to say, hey, we need to put these wealth building mechanisms in place for us to repair things in that way.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we see it in the text. In Exodus 11. I think it's important that we recognize the biblical nature of these things, and these are not matters of opinion, and they're not matters of, for those of people who claim to believe the Bible, and that's the sad reality. Much of the reticence and resistance and outright defiance against these kinds of concepts and ideas are from the people who thump the Bible the most, and it seems like they're beating it on the outside, but they're not reading it on the inside. And that's where we get these kinds of obstinate and arrogant stances as it relates to matters like this. But
So
Exodus 11.
Verse number 2, it says, now announce to the people that both men and women should ask their neighbors for silver and gold items. The Lord gave the people favor with the Egyptians. In addition, Moses himself was very highly regarded in the land of Egypt by Pharaoh's officials and the people. They were told to ask for gold and silver from their neighbors.
Yes.
From the folks who were of means, that they would get that gold and silver before they were delivered from the hand of Egypt.
I say often that what they received was 400 years of severance, of back pay, rather. They received what was due to them. They just received it in a lump sum at the same time on their way into the promised land. And we'll see their stewardship of those resources in varying ways throughout the book of Exodus, but they're possessing them, they're receiving them, is just getting what they were due for the work that they had done.
So that's what we see there. And then God ultimately explains this last plague to them that we covered in the last episode with the death of the firstborn of Egypt, which causes Moses to leave Pharaoh upset. In verses number 8 and 9, he says, all these officials of yours will come down to me and bow before me, saying, get out, you and all the people who will follow you. After that, I will get out. And he went out from Pharaoh's presence, fiercely angry. So Moses was upset. And then God reassures him in verse 9. The Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you, so that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. We cannot reiterate that enough. The reason that Pharaoh's heart was hardened. The reason why he did not listen to him was because of the fact that the Lord wanted to make sure that his wonders were multiplied in the land of Egypt. I'm going to prove to them that question that you asked Pharaoh, who is this God? I'm going to prove to y'all who I really am.
And it's so important that we take a theological, a wide lens to this idea that God self-discloses God's self. God is not discoverable. We cannot discover God through investigation and, those kinds of things. God cannot be measured in a microscope or weighed in a scale, or, you know what I mean? That grandma would say, so high you can't get over them, so low you can't get under them, so wide you can't get around them. So God, the unknowable God, because of our rebellion and sin, God has to self-disclose God's self to us. And the grace of God is that God self-discloses through Scripture, through history, through these wonders in Egypt in a way that is communicable, understandable, graspable, as it were, to the people that God is self-disclosing God's self to. So God is disclosing God's self to Pharaoh, who says, I don't know Yahweh. Fine. So I'm going to do these 10 plagues. We talked about it in our last session, so that I'm going to speak your language.
Yeah.
So that you can come to know me. So the 10 gods that I am proving dominion over are to show you the one God who has all power. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. So at the end of chapter 11, we wind up with Pharaoh once again having his heart hardened, or his heart being hardened. And then that's when we move into what God gives the Israelites as instructions for the Passover in chapter 12. So this is where we enter our session talking about masking up. And I always wanted to drop this as an illustration or a point, and I think I'm going to do it now. I'm going to quote Mr. Delivered, Andre Caldwell, and say, wear your mask.
Your mask.
Wear your mask.
Your M-A-S.
So we're going to be talking about masks in this episode and masking up. But our shift text, as we do every other time, is talk about the verse number 13 in chapter 12. We're going to work through the passage itself, but verse 13 is really, as you mentioned, that seminal moment or seminal text in this particular text. And it says, the blood on the houses where you are staying will be a distinguishing mark for you. When I see the blood,
yes, sir,
I will pass over you. No plague will be among you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. That's verse number 13.
One day, St. Mark and friends, I'm going to teach y'all how to shout on reading the Bible.
Just reading the Bible.
This verse is one of those verses that every single time you hear it or read it or think about it, you ought to have that good grandma. You know how grandma stiffened up on you and just got stiff? That ought to do that. When I see the blood, I'll pass over. And there is no greater picture of the gospel.
Yeah.
In the old covenant, and there are wonderful pictures, but this one is one that, and it's special. We'll come forward to this later on, but it's special because this is the one Jesus himself is going to employ the night he's about to die, the night he's going to be arrested. He's employing this very symbol of the Passover with the idea that the blood is what makes the plague, the death angel pass by, and our entire hope for heaven is in the blood covering that we are to have on our lives through our faith in Jesus Christ. That's the whole thing right there. When I see the blood, I'll pass over. It doesn't matter what's in the house. Doesn't matter how messy. He doesn't tell you to clean the house up. He just says put the blood on the outside of it, and the death plague will pass over.
And what we see is this great exchange happening for the people, that the life of that sacrificed animal, because that blood comes from a sacrifice, is exchanged. And we talked about this last season for the occupants in the house. and allows them to avoid that final plague, which is symbolized by the blood on the doorpost.
And Pastor John, it's so critical. I got a reference again, our last lesson where we talked about how there are certain plagues that God saves Israel from. So Goshen had light when the rest of Egypt was dark, and Israel's animals didn't die when Egyptian livestock did die, and all of these matters. But then when you come to plague 10, when you come to this, God says you might suffer if you don't follow this instruction.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And the instruction is sacrifice and blood, because God is painting a picture for Israel and their future generations, and therefore, including those of us who come to faith in Christ, of what is necessary to make it when that final plague. There's another. It's coming, and it's worse than COVID, and it's worse than monkeypox and all these other things. And by the way, I can't believe with all these viruses out here, Pastor John, people still going to the bathroom not washing your hands. Wash your hands too. But what I'm trying to say is, with all of these things that are happening out in the world, they're not as bad as the coming wrath of God is going to be. And the simple instruction of God is put the blood on you.
It's so simple. The blood itself covered the people from the plague.
Yeah.
And we talked about kind of supernatural means of these plagues happening, and then natural means. But it seems like there's a natural covering that has supernatural overtones here in this text.
Yeah.
When they're taking the blood, this is natural blood from animals, but it's symbolic to be able to cover the people as the plague passes over their homes. Now, let's talk about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
All of us experienced this COVID-19 pandemic in March of 2020. And we as a church were trying to figure out, what do we do?
Along with the rest of the whole wide world.
The whole world was trying to figure it out. And so, we were leaning heavily on our health officials, those who were part of our congregation. Everything changed for us. And interestingly enough, COVID-19 showed up right around Passover.
Right around the time as we were preparing for Passover, which is also Easter season. Very, very interesting timing for that worldwide discovery. We know we was doing some things before. And, I'm one of those people, Pastor John, that, everybody claimed they had it before they knew what it was, and I'm one of them folk. I know I had it before the kid, and I had it before we knew COVID was COVID. But the timing of that, of the discovery and the communication to the world that this is a thing, very, very interesting that it happens during that season.
Now, what officials told us to do, you would think, everybody would be okay with it.
You would think.
So here's the thing. After 9/11, everybody was on edge, and the government was like, now y'all can't come through the airports anymore. We're gonna create a whole organization and a whole process for you to get to your gate now.
Yeah.
Nobody argued up and down about freedoms and First Amendment rights.
And there may be some too young or who do not remember, weren't even alive, listening to us or watching us now, who don't remember. There was a time when you could just kind of walk up to the gate.
Just go to the airport.
I remember, when you were going to get someone, you could park your car and leave it, and you could just kind of walk up to the gate and say hey to people and things like that. And there was a little metal detector or something like that, but it wasn't any. You certainly weren't taking your shoes off, and we didn't have laptops to take out of bags or anything like that. But there was a even as frustrating as it has become in many cases, you don't have people being outright resistant and defiant. I'm not taking my shoes off. You don't have that.
Because they want to fly.
I'm going to keep my laptop in my bag. I wish you would. Because they will take you down and beat you up and put you inside of this little room that you can't get out of on your own. They got to come let you out of it. But then when you come to this simple instruction, and as they were learning and as it was being discovered how contagious it was and the matters that mattered to that, and they said, all right, here's the solution. Hey guys, just put on a mask. put on a barrier. If everybody wears a barrier, we gonna make it.
That's it.
And Bama's was like, no.
And so people scoffed at the idea.
Yeah.
And just couched it in freedom language. Like, I want to be able to freely not wear my mask and be free. I want to be able to breathe. Now they're saying, here's the thing. Ironically, they're talking about I can't breathe. They're now co-opting, because it can't be a Growth Factor podcast without talking about white European appropriation. They co-opt the phrase of social justice movements and say, I can't breathe.
Yeah.
And now we're in a dilemma. So today, there have been over 1 million, and we can't gloss over that. Over 1 million COVID-related deaths just in the U.S. alone.
And you're not even touching the persons for whom long COVID has affected their lives. It's in my house as well, a long COVID issue. Learned recently that it affects, so many things neurologically. That's the symptom of the taste and smell going away. People who have depression, it makes their depression worse. People who have digestive issues, gastro issues, it makes that worse. It robbed so many people of so many experiences. High school students who couldn't have their full graduation, and we had first semester college students who had to do their first semester online. They couldn't even go in and move in the dorm, and what I mean, and all of the festivities that come along with that, weddings, and then it impacted the ways we grieve. Funerals changed drastically. Those kinds of things. So you're talking about the physical deaths and the expiration of life, which is horrible and tragic, and much of which seems avoidable. But then you talk about the other losses that we grieve, that create these pains and lingering sorrows. That time is one of the things we can redeem, but we cannot reclaim. We can't go back in time as much as we'd like to, and all because of a simple instruction that people scoffed at. Something simple like, first of all, everybody stay home. and then if you go out and you can't be 6 feet away, put on a mask. And listen, the earth started healing itself during that little shutdown time, and some of us who move around all the time
sat down somewhere,
things of that nature. And I'm gonna just stand on my soapbox right here and say this ain't any lesson, but it's just, I need to get it out of my heart. I think we should just shut down 2 or 3 months every year, just as the world. Let's just shut down 2 or 3 months out the year, just to get reset and started over again. But in a serious way, I don't want to make light of it. It is indeed. It seemed to be, wash your hands, wear your mask, stay distant. They seem to be simple ways to handle such a deadly or life-altering virus.
And God has given us the marvel of modern medicine to help us through that process.
I laugh at the people who didn't trust the doctors who said wear a mask, but then wanted the doctors to treat them when they got COVID.
Oh, first ones there.
You know what you're talking about now. Now that I can't breathe,
now help me.
Yeah, now that it's ravaging my body. Now tell me what to do and tell me how I can live. That is a tragic. And the parallel we're trying to draw, y'all, is the covering aspect of Passover that happens spiritually. Again, practically, socially, there are things that God gives us to cover that keeps us from some of these very, very tragic and negative consequences. The Pastor John, the thing that resonates in my spirit and my soul when I think about these kinds of things, I think, and I try to teach our church often we say often thinking from an eternal perspective, what's going to matter in eternity. And imagine standing before the Lord God, and God says, you're guilty of murder. And you say, how? I ain't nowhere in the world. We're not at 10 Commandments. I didn't murder anybody. I never picked up a gun or a knife or anything. And God said, well, you coughed. And had you had a mask on, then someone's mother would not have expired at the moment that she did. I mean, that's something that simple can be something that significant.
Yeah. That's so true, man. That's so true. So I want to talk a little bit about the plagues and the distinctions here, because this plague actually helped to deliver Israel, but the plague we experience now is having us shelter in place, had us, because y'all back outside. So it had us sheltering in place. And the Passover covering was meant to be celebrated together. This was a feast that ultimately was to be celebrated together to celebrate their deliverance from the land of Egypt. But masking has made us become isolated. Like you can barely recognize people behind masks these days, and it's like they get offended because they're like, "You didn't see me the other day." No, you had a whole mask on.
Yeah.
So there's a distinction between these two plagues, but there's still a covering that helps to protect the health and welfare of people today. That really is something that parallels what happened in this Egyptian account here.
Yeah, I mean, and again, through this, we there is a delivering work of God. What God is doing in the world all the time, through and in spite of everything, is God is reconciling the world to himself.
Yeah.
God is reconciling. God is re-establishing relationship with humankind. The kingdom is being spread and furthered and advanced through the proclamation of the gospel in word and the demonstration of the gospel in the works of God's people, so that I need to see this through a gospel lens, through a gospel window, that covering and safety are the message of the gospel. And as you say, the difference is of what happens in Israel historically and what has happened to us very recently. They do not overshadow that it points us to the gospel, and that there are ways to interpret and see these circumstances as God declaring something to us that is good news for those who will believe, but it is also something startling to those who will not.
That's good.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the Passover and this idea of covering from the text here in Exodus chapter 12. But we got to let people know and remind people, especially if you have not tuned into our last season as we talked through how to study the Bible. We did cover a section on the feast in Judaism. So Passover is one of the 7 feasts covered in Leviticus 23. You have Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread, First Fruit, Feast of Weeks, Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Booths, a festival of booths or tabernacles. So this is one of those 7 feasts that the Israelites were commanded to celebrate in perpetuity, to continue to celebrate as long as the people were alive. And we're going to find out why here in the text as we work through chapter 12. But that's important context for us to understand that this is one of those 7 feasts.
Yeah, this is a marker for remembrance. And when you talk about these feasts, you're talking about what we. I don't want to go too far here on this lesson, but the feasts are worship services. So think about Sunday morning church, the family reunion, communion, state fair, all that together at the same time. That's what when the feast, all of the celebratory graduation, put all of those events together, roll them into a ball, and that's what the Jewish feast was like. It was a hullapalooza. And the intent, God's intent, for those of us who are new covenant believers, is that we're supposed to have that every time we get together. Yeah, that's I done took it too far. I was trying not to take too far. But you got to realize they didn't just sit around or they didn't just have these feasts, and it wasn't just merely this quiet, solemn. It was raucous. It was joyous. They danced. Your Jesus went to these feasts all of his life because he had to keep the law of Moses perfectly. He went to them all his life, and he ate, and he drank wine, and he danced.
He went to all of them.
He danced. Your Jesus. Your Jesus. To dance to a beat. It's kind of cha-cha slide style, electric slide style, wobble-ish. I'm just so you get the picture in your mind of how the Jewish people celebrated these feasts, and if you see them today celebrating them, it's very, very, very raucous, loud, and celebratory. And get that in your mind when you think of Passover.
And this was part of their cultural expression. Absolutely part of their cultural expression. So what we find here in verse number 2, let's read it. This month, the Lord is talking to Moses and Aaron, this month is to be the beginning of months for you. It is the first month of your year. This is significant because when the people are delivered, this is so significant that it resets the entire calendar.
Yeah.
There's something about freedom
Yeah,
that resets the whole calendar. That the first of the month now appears on the day that they were freed.
Yeah. The strange calendar of God is that what for us is Marchy, April or Aprilish is the beginning of the Jewish calendar. And again, this is we're coming forward. This is the time Jesus dies.
Yep.
So his death starts a thing. The end of his earthly journey starts something. And that's what the Passover is a picture of new beginning. This is why the Apostle Paul says, if anyone is in Christ, the person is a new creation. Old things are passed away and all things become new because freedom resets,
And I don't know why people are so upset that folks like us want to celebrate Juneteenth when it's very biblical that the calendar resets at freedom.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to do. Okay, y'all. I hate to say this. You can have July 4th. Guess what? We won't free then.
Yeah, that's 1776. We wouldn't.
So we want our own freedom. We're going to reset that calendar and say Juneteenth was our freedom day.
And I'm going to say this, Pastor John. I'm going to speak for me. I'm not going to speak for you, and I'm not going to speak for anybody else. I'm going to take July 4th also because I need another day off. So I'm going to take it, and I'm going to grill some hot dogs and burn them a little bit because I like a burnt hot dog, and I'm getting a little hamburger. But the freedom celebration for us is marked by Juneteenth when, and we spoke about it recently, the Emancipation Proclamation finally got to those.
And listen,
in Texas.
And if you work for one of them employers that wants to celebrate Juneteenth, please don't allow them to serve enslaved people's meals at the company outing in June. Please don't.
Black-eyed pea salad. If you don't put a hawk in them peas and sit down somewhere.
No seasoning.
Yeah, just don't.
Nothing.
Yeah, don't.
Your peas look like they came right out the bag.
Yeah. Goodness gracious. Yeah.
Okay, so
black-eyed peas salad.
So this freedom for them though reset the calendar, which is very important.
Very much so.
Because historically, like you mentioned, when you look at March, April, oh my goodness, such a significant period, not just in Jewish history, but Christian history, because it tells a story that we certainly ultimately tell in the gospel of Christ. And
it's not coincidental, Pastor John, that this is also the beginning of the harvest period in this part of the world, that they're marking freedom from the time that the harvest is going to be beginning to be collected. That's the idea is that, again, around Passover, you see the picture of the death of Christ. You see the picture of the resurrection of Christ in first fruits, and a picture of the church of Christ in the Feast of Weeks or Pentecost. That each of these feasts are pointing to something about a New Testament reality that has to do with the life, the death, the resurrection, and the empowerment that comes from the Holy Spirit of the Church of Jesus Christ. And this is not, it's not coincidental that this is, it's a start of something. God is starting something new through this freedom process.
Yeah. And these instructions for the Passover go on in verse 3. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, they must each select an animal of the flock according to their father's families, one animal per family. If the household is too small for a whole animal, that person and the neighbor near his house are to select one based on the combined number of people. You should apportion the animal according to what each will eat. You must have an unblemished animal, a year-old male. You may take it from either the sheep or the goats. And what we see here is a different approach from God, because you mentioned this previously, but before each one of the plagues, God didn't require anything from the Israelites to protect them. He protected them supernaturally because they're right across the water in Goshen, but he's protecting them from these latter 5 plagues, 6 plagues. And so now he's requiring them to do something for this particular Passover event. The selection of the animal, again, without blemish, the idea is that it represents Christ. And I think last season we talked about the sheep representing the divine nature of Christ, the goat representing the reality that Christ became sin for us, so that while he is the Lamb of God on the cross, he looks like the goat of God. And in that way, the sheep or the goat could represent Christ, the picture of the Lord Jesus Christ and his death. But then the blood application is on you. So you have to accept. You have to trust. You have to believe. You have to put your faith in, and that's the blood application. Now, when you come back into the house here, this is the part I like. The part I like is when you come back into the house, and you are gathering to do this feast and this meal and that kind of thing. Now the protection is God's. God protects. You have applied faith or trust through the application of the blood to the door. Now what God is setting you up for is the celebration inside. I'm going to pass over, by the way, God's protection is not just from, the greatest protection you need is not from the devil, it's from God. You need to be protected from the white light of the red hot wrath of God. Yes, sir.
And the only thing that's going to do that is the blood. But once I'm protected, now I can celebrate in the house.
Yeah.
And that then is on you. It's on you to do the celebrating for the fact that God has promised to pass over.
You know, P, I want to talk to the Israelites who would say in this moment, I'm just going to believe God. I don't need to put no blood on my doorpost. I don't need to cover my doorpost. I'm just going to believe God. And you know why we can't talk to them? Because they don't exist.
Right.
Because in order to experience this Passover event, you had to do something. One of the things that frustrates and has frustrated us as we've talked through this pandemic is that we've always counseled people to couple your faith with wisdom. That as you believe that God will protect you and your family, there is wisdom in the multitude of counselors. And that there are people around who have told us we needed to protect ourselves. We need to mask up. We need to wash our hands. We need to sanitize our hands. Those are things that you do.
Right.
You need to get the shot.
Yeah.
Those are things that we do to help protect us. It doesn't say we lack faith.
No.
It actually empowers our faith to exercise wisdom.
We did the book of James. James is very clear. Faith without works is dead. If I believe God, then that belief has a corresponding behavior that affirms that I believe God. What I do does not operate in contradiction to my faith. What I do is a confirmation of my faith. Now, I'm not saved by what I'm doing. I'm saved by his grace, but I am participating in my own protection when I do what he says is going to protect me. That's a picture of belief. Hey, doc, if you put this mask on, you will be less likely to catch or give COVID to someone. It's not but this will help some things. Well, all right. Hey, it's too dangerous for everybody to come together all at the same time right now. So let's have some distance between us. All right. Sounds good to me. Well, listen, it may be tough for us to have things the way we can't shake hands like we used to and hug and kiss right now. Let's just get this thing under. All right, sounds good, because faith and wisdom, and then God anoints people in secular fields in the same way God anoints preachers and teachers to preach and teach the word. God, you listen, I'm sure some of our doctors and nurses would tell you they didn't make it through school without God. They needed his hand on their lives to get them through. Are y'all in the comments? Talk back to me here. That God put God's hand on you for you to get through it so you can know what you know. And in that way, listening to those kinds of persons who have that experience, have that education, and have the Holy Ghost. At St. Mark, our team full of people who love Jesus and love the people of God and have the Holy Ghost. And in so doing, they counsel together to give us this kind of advice. And so, we're looking kind of back, not that we're completely out of it now, but we're looking back retrospectively as we walk this Passover together, talking about the COVID reality, but it is also for us going forward. There is nothing wrong with listening to people who have expertise, and education in secular fields, who know what they're talking about.
And we'll see this as we move through our sessions. We'll see that God uses artisans in different areas to be able to bless God's people. We don't want to get too far ahead of it. I don't want to get too far ahead of it.
But even the people who worked with their hands, they are specifically said to have been gifted by God to do so. Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah,
that's good. So let's talk a little bit. And this is me being selfish. I'm about to help me and you out here.
Help us, John.
Let me help us in this passage, okay? Because we've just seen that Moses and Aaron are giving these folks instructions in the household, okay? And part of this instruction, verse number 7, these people who were taking these animals, they must take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses where they eat them. Now, when it comes to applying the blood, the priest drop out of the picture. It's up to the people to apply the blood.
Yeah.
The households were required to do it themselves.
Yeah.
We spent a whole season teaching y'all this truth and reality that we are just called to preach and teach. Guess who has to apply it? And that is the bane of our existence. We preach and teach weekly about issues, and we have to reteach and repreach about issues because there's a lack of application.
Yeah. People say often, "Oh, I know that." You don't know it till you do it. You don't know it till you do it. And so you don't know to be generous until you're generous. You don't know to not hold grudges and to be gracious and kind until you do it. You don't know the power of prayer until you make it a consistent part of your life's discipline. It's on you. I mean, no amount of spiritual education is sufficient for your spiritual formation. I said something good right there. I'm gonna say it again. I'm gonna raise myself an offering after it. But listen to me again. No amount of spiritual education is sufficient for your spiritual formation. Yes, you need to learn. Yes, you need to tune into these things and take these notes. And I hope you got the book and you're accessing notes and all that stuff. But it's not enough. There's something must be done. You must apply these truths to your life in order for them to really become alive to you. There is no amount of information that produces transformation. There must be application, Pastor John.
Yeah, I mean, God could have said, I'm going to let the priest come by and apply this blood.
Mm-hmm. Everybody stay in your house. Moses will be there in a minute.
He going to swing by.
Yeah.
But he didn't.
Yeah.
It was almost as if he's intentional in saying, I need you to be part of this application process so that you understand just how precious this blood is.
Yeah. And the application of this blood in the lives of the people of God, their own inclusion in this expression of this part of their deliverance, and then therefore the celebration of it, this sense of responsibility, it's individual, but it's also communal. It's your household. It's creating a context where the people you are responsible for and therefore responsible to see you as the priest in your space.
Yeah, I like that. That's good.
The one this makes. Now listen. Now this is the thing, Pastor John. You know, the priests, ultimately, we're going to read in the law, priests are going to slaughter these animals that the people bring later on and put them on the altar and stuff like that. And priests are going to put blood in different spaces, sometimes on people or sometimes just on the altar and that kind of thing. But when it comes to Passover, you are the priest who has to slaughter the animal. You're the priest who has to apply the blood.
Yeah, that's very important. And that's one of the things that we attempted to do during the pandemic. We were diligent about providing folks with our medical communities, which we have a robust one here, their opinions, their advice, their medically informed opinions on what we should do. But it really is up to you and has been up to you to apply it. So that's what we leave that to you. Even when it comes to COVID-19, we gave you the information and the education, but it's up to you to make sure that you're doing the application.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about why this is important intergenerationally.
Yeah.
In verses 24 through 27, here's what we see the text says. It says, keep this command permanently as a statute for you and your descendants. When you enter the land that the Lord will give you as he promised, you are to observe this ceremony. When your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? You are to reply, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord. For he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians and spared our homes. And this resulted in this. So the people knelt low and worshiped. Then the Israelites went and did this. They did just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. So the people of Israel were to observe and remember this, not just for their sake, but for their children's sake.
History and legacy. I think, I say this often. I say this about people saying, oh, young people ain't coming to church. Young people leaving the church. If you go back in Christian history and you read the writings of Christian thinkers, theologians, pastors, for the entirety of Christian history, all nearly 2,000 years of it, young people leaving church. That's been the number one thing in every generation and iteration of the Christian church throughout all of history. History and legacy. What is being established is the intergenerational testimony of God's deliverance for the sake of, we'll see this with the Red Sea incident in just a minute, but for the sake of having a restored point of faith, a restored point of revelation, who God is, what God does, so that people live in their generation with confidence in God based on what God has done in the former generations. I love, and Gideon gets a lot of praise and flack in the book of Judges. When God comes to Gideon and says, hey, you're a mighty man of valor, I'm going to use you to defeat this army. He says, hey, God, where are those miracles we heard about? And And I the idea that the communication of history and legacy should lead to a certain amount of expectation in the lives of our children and grandchildren, and gratitude and expectation. What God has done for us, and the fact that we can expect God to do great things for us. And that's what happens here. This is y'all never forget what I did tonight is the message. Do not forget what I did in the Passover. And each year, I want you to sit down. I want you to celebrate. I want you to remember, because by doing so, you draw your children into close relationship with me. And so if young people are drifting or leaving the faith and that kind of thing, all of the things that people are concerned about, perhaps we have not had enough sit downs and sharing sessions. Because, hey, mama, hey, grandma, if you were to tell your real testimony,
yes, sir,
maybe baby girl or little man Junebug, maybe they might want to get to know your God better if they knew how much you struggled or still struggle. If these frank conversations were taking place, maybe you should do more testifying and less criticizing.
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm trying to help somebody tonight. I'm gonna raise myself off after this, John.
We need to, as parents, as those who are influential over children, if you're a mentor, like, we need to be able to rehearse God's faithfulness in front of them.
And I'll give you, John, you and I have a living example. We're both privileged to teach at Philander Smith College, a local historically black college, and what a joy it is to sit and to help to shape the young minds of those students. And we teach social justice on the collegiate level, and we are shocked every semester at the lack of awareness, familiarity that these students have for how the world works and the history of our people. In the U.S., we marvel at it. Am I talking bad? I'm talking right.
Every semester, we are just appalled and marvel at the idea that you don't know this.
Yeah, things that we think are common knowledge and understood. And here's the thing. Let me also say this. Ooh, have mercy. Thank you, Lord. We need to stop assuming that people have a level of knowledge, familiarity, spirituality that they do not have. One of the great tragedies of discipleship, evangelism, Christian communication, I see it as a weakness in much of the preaching and teaching we listen to. People act like you ought to know this already. You don't know this. You don't know. People don't know. If nobody sat down and told me, how would I know?
Yeah, I teach a history and impact of the Black church class to people who are part of the Black church. And I am just amazed at just like what I would consider baseline understanding of the Black church and the history and impact of the Black church. Folks are like, I never heard that before.
Right.
But again, you can't assume, even if someone is ingrained in the space, that they completely understand the history and impact of what has gone on historically, socially, culturally. So I don't make any assumptions about any of my students. I think it's very helpful for anyone who is ready to take on a learning posture, because you got people on the other side of that.
Oh, yeah.
You have folks that be like, oh, yeah, I knew that already. No, you didn't. You did not know. So don't even act like you did. But I think for some reason we try to, when we take that approach, we don't want to be seen as someone who just don't know or don't have the knowledge. Yeah. So we make sure that we just go over to the other side and say, "Oh, I know it all."
And I want to give this little piece to Pastor John, and people, they we laugh about it. The people say, "Well, you just know it off the top of your head." I do. I genuinely try to learn something every single day, like something or some things I never heard or knew. I want that it's an addiction. I am an information junkie. And the more you know, the more you can The more you learn, the more you can contextualize
Yep.
and critically examine that which you already know or that which you think you know. And that's what this is the point of the Passover conversation. Whew. God orders them not just to have the Passover meal, but he gives them directives for a Passover conversation.
Yeah.
To rehearse and reiterate and re-engage and re-explore what God has done. And that kind of experience is what we cannot take for granted or lose. We have to be willing to share. And my father said for years, and I get it more and more, he gets smarter and smarter the older I get, repetition breeds retention. The more I hear it, the more likely I am to remember it, and then the better I will be at processing it.
And this is why, and I'll be done after this, this is why so many of our young people fall away from the faith after they graduate from high school, and when they go through this individuation process in college, is because they haven't had those rehearsed conversations of what God has been doing and the faithfulness of God in their households. We depend on people like our pastors, Mona and Pastor Sipo, to disciple our kids on Sunday, and we do nothing Monday through Saturday. And the tough part in that is that when they get that one meal on Sunday, that they're eating junk food the rest of the week.
Yes, sir.
And they take that junk food off to them in college, and we are appalled, and we think, oh, how could you? Well, because our parents aren't discipling their own kids. And that's what this passage is about. Yeah. You need to be able to rehearse God's faithfulness with your children every single night of the week, and don't depend on your youth pastor or your children's pastor to do it for you.
Yeah, I want to put this commercial in there for them, because one of the efforts that's happening around St. Mark, especially in that space, is empowering parents to disciple their children in our children's ministry and in our student ministry. Our pastors over there who do a phenomenal job at teaching our kids and engaging our kids and being present in their celebrations and present in their crises. They're also seeking to empower you, mom, you, dad, you, grandma, you, granddad, to disciple the kids the rest of the week, because there are table conversations that only you can have in that house that will make a world of difference in your child's life of faith. Pastor John, we got to move on from this, but I feel impressed to continue with this little piece right here of it. And it's so critical that we grasp. You talk about kids going to college. The first thing I remember, y'all know Pastor Seth Martin. He's a son of St. Mark, and Seth said the first thing, he's taking an intro to philosophy course at Hampton his first year, and the first thing the professor does is come after their belief in God. The very first class, the first day. Y'all don't believe in God, do you? Very first day, first class. I can't believe y'all still around here believing in God and believing the Bible. As soon as he hit campus, this is what happened. And so the challenge is out there. The devil is out there trying to dissuade our kids from the faith. But I say all the time that some of our young people didn't leave the faith. They were never given the faith in the first place.
That's so good.
And we can't just bringing them to church or claiming a church or putting them in a group at church just for a while is not sufficient. It has to be these table conversations.
I think that really just helps some parents. So I'm glad that we were able to spend some time on that. The other thing that mentions in this text, the last couple of things, number one, is that the people's deliverance was actually preceded by their obedience. Before they were delivered,
yes, sir,
they were called to obey. Verse number 50 in chapter 12, then all the Israelites did this. They did just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. So they weren't delivered until they obeyed.
Yeah.
And so what we see in terms of COVID-19, man, this thing probably should have been under control.
Oh, very much so.
A long time ago. And many people have not obeyed and failed to wear their mask in the process. So now we're stuck with folks who claim their freedom in not wearing masks, but they actually have led to further confinement for some people. because some people are still scared to go out and still to be outside because people are just reckless with what they got going on. Yeah. So what we see here is that the people realize that we aren't going to be delivered until we obey what God has said in this text, and they all decide they're going to cover their doorposts and their lintels in blood.
Yeah. I want to get to this last piece of the lesson, but I do want to say that we're going to get into later in Exodus what it looks like to be a good neighbor. And that's the emphasis of the Ten Commandments. We'll talk about that. That's the emphasis of the law of Moses. It's mostly about how to take care of other people. And please stop. And I'm going to say it until y'all stop it. Please stop posting, take care of yourself first. Do you. Look out for you first and all that stuff. Stop it, because it ain't the Bible. And not just that it's not the Bible, but people who work and live in that space that deal with psychology say that's the key to unhappiness. Selfishness is the key to unhappiness. Y'all hear me quote from the book all the time, The Paradox of Generosity. Y'all, if you want to be unhappy, look out for you first. That's the way to do it. And self-stewardship is not the same thing as selfishness or self-centeredness.
You just messed up their entire IG account.
Yeah, man.
They got to now delete all them posts and all
take that stuff down and be other-centered. And that's the key. That's what makes you. I promise you, there is all the happy chemicals in the brain and all that stuff are released through giving and generosity and all that stuff. And y'all be talking about, I used to be that person, but I learned better now. No, you didn't. You didn't learn better.
You learned nothing.
No, you're hurt. And I get it. You want to protect yourself, but that's why you got to trust that blood to do the protecting, and you do the obeying. And we got to go, Pastor John. I'm getting
happy.
I need a witness here.
We need these soapbox moments, though. Look at verse number 51. On that same day, the Lord brought the Israelites out of the land of Egypt. And look at this last part. According to their military divisions. Now, up until this point, I don't know if Israel has had a military. And if you look, we're going to talk about this later in the text. God decides not to send them straight into the land because there are folks in the land who could probably defeat them militarily. So what they see here in this text is that now their lives are going to be far from normal. Yeah. That they're going to be taking a different approach to their lives. And that's the thing I think we are experiencing now, that we talk about this new normal that is happening with COVID-19. And it's like, well, ain't no new normal.
There's no such thing as normal. We have to embrace and lean into and discover the opportunities in what will be an ever-changing abnormal.
Yeah.
Which is how the world has always been, but it's not always how we have perceived it.
And that's why when people are like, oh, I remember when we were able to stop longing for the past and start preparing for the future. What does the future look like now that we have experienced this? I think we do this far too often. We do this in the church space. See, I didn't want to go there, but we do this every time we try to figure out what the future looks like. We start to long for the past, and God says, hey, I want to prepare you for a future that is post Egypt. And we're going to see the Israelites over and over again.
Gonna have every time it gets sticky and tough and tight, they're going to say, well, maybe wasn't Egypt so good? Well, if it was so good, why were you crying for freedom from it?
Exactly.
Why did you cry for deliverance from it? Here's the thing. My friend Corey Hodges, and I quote him often, saying, there's no potential in the past. Nostalgia, I put it this way, nostalgia is the enemy of vision. And you can't get to what God has next because you keep looking at what God did last. And that's a word for organizations, individuals. It's a word for our nation. It's a word for your family. It's a word for your relationship. It's a word for your mama. Everybody needs to know that God is always refreshing and restarting and renewing. And stop craving this old Egyptian experience when God is trying to take you onward to something better and something brighter. It ain't at the end of 2019. I did not know the significance of the sermon, Pastor John. On watch night, I preached a sermon called "It Ain't Never Gonna Be Like It Was." Not grasping in like the Old Testament prophets, looking without fully grasping. And I knew that it was right, and I knew what I was saying, but not the full implications of it, of what would happen in just a few months in 2020. And we cannot, if you're a St. Mark member, listen to me, we are not going backwards. Ain't, can't, won't, don't, shan't. Go back. Go backwards. Even when we remember fondly, it needs to be a fond memory, not a future aspiration.
That's good.
Yeah, let's keep moving forward, man.
Yeah.
Onward, Christian soldiers marching as to war with the cross of Jesus going on before. That's my soul has no desire to stay where doubts arise and fear dismayed. Some may dwell where these abound, but my prayer, my aim is higher ground. That ought to be our desire.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of the Growth Factor podcast, where we discuss what it looks like to mask up. We do pray that you won't look at the Passover again the same, that when you see the blood, God says, I will pass over. And we do hope that this was encouragement to you. If it was, we want you to go over to share this particular episode and also follow and like our podcast on all major platforms. We also want you to join our growing community over on Facebook, the Growth Factor. It's facilitated over there by Pastor Chris. She is doing an amazing job to keep you all engaged in the lessons that we're teaching each week. So make sure you all go over and follow that particular page. And then finally, we ask that you all leave us a rating or review of the podcast. We appreciate you all for letting us know how much you like what we're covering. And we want to make sure that we continue through this journey through the book of Exodus as we continue to dive into these deep waters. Next week, we're going to cover our next lesson. You don't want to miss it. We're looking forward to it. We'll see you next go round.
This has been The Growth Factor, a broadcast ministry of St. Mark Baptist Church. Be sure to follow this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and join our Facebook group, The Growth Factor, for daily motivational content. Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for listening.